Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Welcome to Emergency Management Associates. We're coming to you from the Area Command, 392 miles west of Kitty Hawk Beach, North Carolina. Guys, this is important today. We say that almost every day, but this is important. Now, folks, we've been having some thunder the last 35, 40 minutes. So this means that we may have to abandon this show at some point in time, but I want to make sure we get out the important information before we may have to abandon this show. So everybody, please hang tight here. Please stay with us. We're going to make sure this is, number one, a good show, and we're going to also make sure that we get out the important information so that you might be able to have that information that you need to have in case something happens. Not just in case, but when it happens. Okay? That's the whole purpose of our show today, is to make sure we get out the information that is pertinent to all of you so you can make certain decisions that you need to make when an emergency happens. Okay? That's the primary goal of this program. As you know, we talk about emergencies, we talk about disasters, we also talk about how to prepare. We talk about all the time how to prepare. That's what we're going to do as well tonight. Tomorrow is Friday, Preparedness Friday. Please join us tomorrow for Emergency Preparedness Friday at 4 p.m. tomorrow afternoon, Friday, August 15th. We're already at the middle of August. Incredible. Totally incredible. Now, we have a lot of people here already. We have Demon Catman from east of England, one of our mods here. He's a great man. I look up to him. We have Josie here. We have Sleeping Volcano, another one of my dearest friends here, who's also moderator here. We have Rebecca Griffiths from New Mexico. I love this lady. She's a great lady. Thank you for being here, Rebecca. Thunderbird Signs Diana, thank you also for being here. It's a pleasure to have you here. Juanito from El Centro, California is here. Gosh golly gee, we're just happy to see you here. Thank you for being here as well. Now, guys, I want to get as much information out to you as I possibly can. I was hoping to have even more people here to watch this program, but I'm going to get started nonetheless. The first thing I'm going to talk about is Tropical Storm Erin out in the north central Atlantic Ocean. North central Atlantic Ocean. Here's a report from Fox News as to what's going on. Be advised. Tropical Storm Erin is intensifying, and by tomorrow, it could be a full-blown hurricane. Watch this program.
The hurricane hunters also scheduled to fly through Erin later this afternoon. Are you ready for it?
Finding its groove, yeah, that data is going to be helpful.
It is incredibly helpful. That's how you know it's getting closer to land, right? We get the hunters involved. But NOAA's hurricane hunters, they are ready for those missions into Erin. They got into place yesterday. The WP-3D Orion aircraft, that's affectionately known as Miss Piggy, it's scheduled to take off from Christchurch, Barbados, 4 p.m. Eastern today. There's a look, by the way, at some of the video posted to Facebook yesterday with Miss Piggy. There she is. Little nod to Miss Piggy there. But the flight is going to collect that critical data to improve forecasts for Erin. Every now and then we're able to get video from inside as they have all of this equipment to be able to do that. So we want to bring in Fox Weather hurricane specialist Brian Norcross. Brian, Stephen and I talked about not a ton of change this morning compared to last night, but certainly out of the discussion from the National Hurricane Center, important, I guess, to 24 to 48 hours, that window that they're now narrowing in on for that intensification.
Yeah, it still is not in a good atmosphere for intensifying. There's still dust and dry air out there. The water temperatures are still cool, and it hasn't been able to completely fight off the hostile atmosphere, but everything we know says there is a pristine atmosphere ahead once it gets near the Caribbean islands. You know, we watch this minute by minute, and it seems like it's taking forever, but actually it's kind of right on schedule. The forecast hasn't changed in any big way. But let's start with the part that folks in the U.S. have been focusing on, and there's a little shift in the models that happened yesterday. So here is the end of the cone, and here we are now Tuesday, so 5 days out, and they're forecasting a 125-mile-an-hour storm centered somewhere in this circle, so east of the Bahamas. And obviously this looks a little scary, obviously, because if it keeps going, it's going to get pretty close to the U.S. But it is going to curve, and exactly what that arc is what's unknown. What you know, we just want to be sure is that it doesn't come over here somehow and end up somehow going up the East Coast. I mean, that's not impossible, but that is not likely. If we kind of extend out the cone with our eyes and take that arc into account, you get something like that. It would be a wider cone if the cone went out 6 or 7 days. And if we look at the individual models, this is the one that kind of freaked everybody out yesterday. That's the European model. It came in much closer to Cape Hatteras. If that turns out to be right where the center is, there are going to be significant effects. There are going to be impacts for sure there on the Outer Banks and in the Sounds because of just the flow of the water and the wind. But if it's that close, and it is a very, very strong hurricane and a large hurricane, as it is expected to be, that's going to be much more significant impacts. Then the what's called the AIFS, that's the European AI model, is a little farther offshore. Still some impacts, but obviously that's much less. And then the Google DeepMind model is even farther offshore, and the American GFS is over here. And you would see that these would be a significant threat to Bermuda if this is a big, strong hurricane, or could be. As you were talking about earlier, it's Bermuda, you have to get really unlucky to get the eye wall over top of that relatively small island, but indeed it can happen. So that's the array that we have, and so they look at a consensus of these and other models, and they come up with a consensus to make the cone kind of right in there. So that's where we stand. They're all offshore, but some are close enough to have significant impacts along the shoreline, especially along the outer capes and so forth, maybe even up to Cape Cod. What's going on? Well, high pressure on either side, as we've been talking about, and it's going up into the red zone here. This is low pressure. So think of this low and this low kind of attracting each other, and the highs are creating, there's this channel between them, and exactly what the dynamics and the angles and all are in that channel, that's the difference in the various computer analyses 6 and 7 days out. Okay, here's where we are this morning. There's the storm, and you can see it's a little tiny thing, and the thunderstorms are flaring up, and they're maintaining themselves, so that's more than yesterday, but boy, there's still a lot of dry air around. 50-mile-an-hour winds, west at 17, due west, right down 16.3 degrees north, and the pressure they're estimating to be down just a little bit. Look at the, this is the visible picture now, kind of like a photograph from space, and you can see it's kind of roundish, but we have a lot of dry air out in here, and we can see that when we analyze the dust. And look at that, the dust is kind of wrapping around in here, and that's just drying out the atmosphere, not allowing as many thunderstorms to develop or maintain themselves. So that's keeping it on the weak side. And when we look at the water temperatures, you see it's just getting into the 80s here. But up here, there's going to be a lot more energy for it to work with and a lot less dust. So the energy creates more moisture, pushes away the dust. If the dust by itself is just, we're moving out of the dust, all those things coming together north of the islands there when the water temperatures are not an issue at all. All right, so here's the cone. This is the full cone from the Hurricane Center. You notice just steady intensification. So this is tomorrow morning up to 65 miles per hour. So they're delaying the intensification a little bit, but then calling for a rapid intensification here north of the islands and east of the Bahamas over the next few days. So has to get out of the somewhat hostile atmosphere here. And then we'll see if that happens. Everything, in order for a storm to intensify rapidly, everything has to just come together in the atmosphere, and the ocean is not going to be a problem, and the dust should be receding by that time, although the analysis is it still stays a little dry in the atmosphere around there. Here's the close-up near the islands. Let's take a look at the effect on the islands. And remember, when we look at this, we have a very strong hurricane up here, 120-mile-an-hour storm or 115, whatever, Category 3 storm. But remember, the cone is not the effects. The effects extend outside the cone, and that's why the National Hurricane Center publishes this wind chances map. And you can look up here, for instance, in St. Martin, the northeastern Caribbean, in that green or yellow there, and you see that's in this 20 to 40% chance of 40-mile-an-hour winds sustained. That means gusting over 50, maybe up to 60, somewhere in that range. So this is not an insignificant impact, and to have those kind of odds for really gusty winds. This is not a direct hit from a big hurricane, but this is some impact, especially on these mountainous islands, including in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. So we'll keep that in mind and just watch those percentages as we go and see if they go up and down. All right, here's the way it's going to work there in the islands. I think this is the center up in here, and the storm is kind of shaped like this a little bit. There's a kind of a tail to it, so it's after the fact, so the winds would be coming from the south. So south side of mountainous Puerto Rico and the other islands would probably get the biggest impact from the rain and the wind as that moisture tail comes in after the storm passes to the north. Again, this is the computer estimation, but it's been pretty determined that that's the case. All right, so let's look at our models that we look at. These are the models